Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Tim McCleary. Tim is a culture activation expert and speaker. He is the founder of the Involvement Practice, and he leverages his experience from his amazing career, which involved roles at NBC and as the global brand director for GE, to provide his clients with immersive experiences that drive employee involvement and company growth. I'm really excited to finally have him on the show. He's such an amazing guy with so many great stories and such an awesome perspective. So today we're going to dive into all kinds of stories, examples, and insights, including why it's so important to invite people to be included in change processes, the importance of understanding the role of the grief cycle in change. And by the way, who experiences it when and at what level and how that implements or impacts implementation, the power of transforming environments for people, and of course, the necessity of giving people freedom within a framework so they get to the right destination, but have ownership in the process. Tim is amazing. I'm really thankful we had the time and the opportunity to have him on the show. I'm excited to share this with you today. Thank you all very much for being here. Before we dive in, you're all familiar with our sponsors at this point. So please, if you haven't already, head over to humantel.com and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the best-in-class online training for recognizing changes in emotion through facial expressions and nonverbal communication. All the professional interviewers know by now, please, if you haven't already, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered about both the International Association of Interviewers and the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And while you're online, please head over to inquasive.com to learn more about the programs our clients ask us to facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more. But you all came here today to listen to Tim. So without further ado, I introduce to you Tim McCleary. Tim, it is so great to see you. Thank you very much for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation. How are you?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you so much. It's been what, a couple of years since we've seen each other over coffee.
I think it has been, yeah. And I think that last coffee meeting was purely accidental. This is like the first intentional conversation we've had in a long time, but I'm super excited about it.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, whoever was paying you to stalk me needs a refund because I saw you. So, but hey, so I don't think it's a secret that I live in the Charlotte area for people who listen and pay attention. And you were the first person that I really remember meeting and being impacted by when I moved here. So my wife and I moved here. We didn't know anybody. And I think your story might be kind of similar.
Yeah.
And so I just had to start dragging my introverted ass out to networking events and meetings and start meeting folks. And I don't remember, it might have been a presentation that I gave or one that I attended. I don't really remember.
You gave it. Yeah.
I think you came up to me after somehow we got introduced and we started talking, and you were the first person in Charlotte that I had a conversation with. And I'm like, he's one of them. Like, he's one of the guys that I want to stay in touch with and I want to learn from and I want to be around. So you impressed me right out of the gate. I believe that was 10 years ago now.
You're right. 10 years ago.
So finally we get to do this. So you are, I was going to say a master of, which I know you're a humble guy, so you probably won't like that, but your profession is culture change, what most people would call culture change. I know you use some different terminology for it, but through our conversations and through me seeing you speak and seeing you at work, I've got a little bit of a behind the curtain look at what you do, how you do it, and how awesome you are at what you do. So I would love to ask you a question to open up the conversation to explain a little bit of your approach to this. So I would be grateful if you could please walk us all through, what does it mean to activate culture change?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, Michael. And as I've always joked with you, I'm always intimidated because I know you can read my body language, but you've always assured me that gets turned off when we're having coffee or having a conversation like this. In fact, I'd love to ask you a question during our conversation about that too, because it's so important to the work we do around culture change activation. It's being present, it's having emotional intelligence, being able to read what's going on in the room, really listening. Which is a topic I know you've covered with some of your other guests, the importance of listening. We look at culture change activation in a way that's a bit different than I think most people think of it. People like to put us in a bucket, right? We do it all day long. You meet somebody, you put them in a bucket. It's our way of understanding the world around us in a rapid way. For us, culture change activation is it's based on employee involvement, and I really look at it as an invitation to be involved in the change itself. So I've been trained in the different change management approaches going back to my GE days. We had one that we were trained on internally. I've been certified, ProSci certified. So I understand those models. But what we like is this idea of employees being part of the change. They're doing it. We are not, I don't really like the label of consultant. Nothing against consultants out there who are very good at what they do.
Me neither.
I love that we are involvers. That's the label that I think fits comfortably on us. We go in and we involve a team. Could be a leadership team, could be a functional team, could be a collection of individuals to help them identify the change themselves. And so change, as you know, Michael, they tend to come out of a pain point or an opportunity. Things get to a point where it's just feeling too difficult to continue down the path we're going down, or there's something that if we do, we can maybe leapfrog the competition. So our goal is to have a team deeply understand that pain point or opportunity. What typically happens is we push change away as individuals. We're wired to do that. We're wired to resist change, and it's a self-preservation mode that we go into. That's reasonable. We know that. I love the fact that in your episodes, you've talked to so many people about the importance of being human when we do whatever we do, whether we're an interrogator or whether we are talking to whistleblowers, putting ourselves in their shoes, being a human being with them. I like to say that part of the work we do is helping teams see each other as human beings, not just as coworkers. There's a dimension there a distinction there that is really, really important, that when we start to get to know each other as human beings, we start to unravel the stuff that gets in the way of us doing work together, which incidentally is how we define culture at the involvement practice. It's how work gets done. That's a really simple way of looking at culture, how work gets done. So our goal when we're looking at a change activation program, and I'll talk a bit during our time together about designing offsites, which is a really important piece of the work. It's not all the work we do. We do work around what I would call the guardrails of a culture, mission, vision, values. More often now we're hearing purpose rather than mission. But defining those things, we'll talk about a model that we lifted from McDonald's years ago, and I'll explain that a little further into our conversation. But a way of using those elements of your culture as guardrails to empower your team members.
So much great stuff there to follow up on, but I got to follow up and thank you for your first confession right out of the gate. You've admitted to stealing from McDonald's. I appreciate you being so fast with that. You saved us all a bunch of time.
Guilty.
We'll get the written statement rolling and we're done. But in all seriousness, I love everything that you said. I like how you talk about the guardrails, getting people involved, seeing each other as human. Excuse me. Recently, I was working with a group, and in the age-old situation where sales is mad at how operations is viewing an issue and operations is mad at how sales is viewing an issue. And when I'm talking to each of them independently, they repeat to me what the other person has said. I can't believe they think that way. I'm like, well, I can't blame them. And they look at me like, what did you just say to me? Like, well, that should be their priority. That should be their focus. They should think and operate that way because that's their role. And the conversation with both teams starts that way. Like, no one's necessarily wrong here. We're all human beings. We all have our priorities. We all have our focus areas, our fears. So let's just all validate that right up front to figure out how we use them together. I do have a quick question for you, because you talked a little bit about maybe putting more weight towards purpose as opposed to mission. Mm-hmm. If you had a moment that you could help us understand maybe why that shift is headed that way, or if you believe it's important. I don't want to put words in your mouth because you didn't necessarily say it, but why you believe it's important. But what is the difference between focusing more on purpose as opposed to mission?
Yeah, mission is why an organization does what they do in simple terms. But I think purpose has a different weight to it. Michael, over the years, people have talked about the fact that millennials they're the ones focused on purpose. That's the generation that really leans into purpose, and it's important to them. And it is. There's no denying that. I would argue that every generation leans into purpose. We need a reason to jump out of bed in the morning, right? That's purpose. And so being able to connect with what your organization does and believe in it, that makes going to work a lot more fulfilling because we're all working in a similar direction using different areas of expertise to support the organization, to serve our clients or our customers. I just think it's a slight change. We're hearing more and more about it. I think it's a good one because defining that, I think, could be part of what you're promoting to individuals who are interested in coming to work for your organization. There's certainly generations that are looking for that. They want to see that defined. They want to know that they're part of something bigger than themselves. Back when I was early in my corporate career, the only way I could really feel a sense of purpose, I worked in television when I first started my career out in Hollywood. And although it was an incredible career and I loved every minute of it, I didn't necessarily feel like I was impacting people in a positive way. We were entertaining them. There's nothing wrong with that. But it drove me to do a lot more volunteerism to fill that need. I do believe that we can address both of those when we define purpose a little bit more carefully. When the people that we are attracting and ultimately recruiting onto our teams have a good sense of that.
I agree. And I do. I mean, this is the first we've talked about it, so I don't want to be like,
Mhm.
I agree. That's awesome. I mean, I do agree, but it's not like we put a lot of time and effort behind it. But I do think it's that important shift to get beyond. I think a lot of times when you read a company's mission statement or you hear people talking about changing their mission statement, it almost feels boilerplate, or we have to do it, or we have
Yep.
to have one. And that doesn't mean it's not valuable, because at some point you got to check and say, are we doing the right things for the right reason? Is this in line with how we do business and who we serve? So I get that it's valuable, but it can seem rote. Like everybody does it, so we do it.
Yes.
But on the purpose side, what are we doing here? Why are we doing it? And then how do we help employees either find purpose or align purpose or evolve their purpose? Or to your example, even just experience their own. So maybe they're a great employee and they do a good job here, but their real purpose is to volunteer and, I don't know, take care of stray
Sure.
pets or something. So they have the opportunity to do that and we support it, whatever it is. But I do agree. To circle back, you mentioned a lot about being involvers and getting employees involved and helping employees experience and understand and find the value in what's happening and how it impacts them at an individual level but besides the organization level. I would like to step aside for one quick second, because I know you mentioned the offsites and the experiences and the different things that you do. But before we get to the good stuff, I'd like to pivot for a second and ask you, in your expert opinion, why do you think so many change initiatives fall flat? Because I gotta believe that most of them are executed with the best of intentions and some research, whether it was right or wrong. So, in your expertise, why do they fall short?
Yeah, I like that question a lot, Michael. The statistic out there is 70% of all attempted changes inside organizations fail. Our goal is to help our clients become part of the 30% who succeed with change. There are three key reasons that we've identified of why we see that failure rate. One is that there's no buy-in to the change, meaning that leaders have all the right intentions to take the organization in a certain direction, but they're not creating the space for employees to get to the point where they're bought in. Again, I've been listening to a lot of your episodes.
Thank you.
I believe it was Catherine Armstrong who talked about the speed at which we move as leaders, and often we're outpacing our employees.
Mhm.
If there's a downsizing, we've had a chance to process that, but our team members have not. So as a leader, we're privy to what's going on. We've got a few weeks to go through that emotional experience that's about to happen. But when we start to talk to employees about it, that's the first they've heard of it. And yet in our mind, we just need to get to the end result. Let's move. They're human beings that are going through a massive amount of change, shock. I'll talk a little bit about the 7 stages of change that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross outlined that I think are really important as we think about change. But so no buy-in to change. I do a keynote called the Black Box of Change, and without revealing how we pay
You missed
this
the whole
off.
thing.
Yeah. And then nobody has to attend any event that I'm at.
Yeah, we'll free up your schedule. You get time to do other stuff.
That's right. But I set up a scenario on stage where an individual is brought on stage and they don't know what's going to happen. I do not give them a chance to buy into the change they're about to experience. The second thing I do is I don't model. I don't model for them what that change is going to look like. So they're left out on their own to figure it out. This is common inside organizations. Leaders are not modeling the end result, what that change is going to look like. They're not admitting that this is hard for them as well, not being human during the change. And I've been an executive. It's a very difficult role. We struggle with all the politics around that. We struggle with how we're perceived as leaders. We can be seen as soft if we're being too human. I understand the balance of all of that. And I think that's an advantage. A lot of our team members come from those environments where we've walked in the shoes of the clients that we're serving. So we know how challenging that can be. The third reason that changes fail is what I call telling and selling. We simply write a great communication plan. We tell our employees, this is why we're doing this, and this is going to be great, and show them all the reasons why this is going to be great. That's just not enough. And when there's this gap, what happens is an emotional reaction is triggered, and that emotional reaction is fear. So it's going back to our natural resistance to change, that sense of self-preservation, push it away. And that leads to fear, which can be paralyzing. I mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, and I think most of your listeners would be familiar with the 5 stages of grief. Unfortunately, it's part of life, and we all go through it. She outlined the 5 stages of grief not to be linear, but to be more as a starting point for us to go through the grief experience, the grief journey. And those 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, what's important to understand, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, is you and I are not going to experience those 5 in the same order, at the same intensity. I may skip one that you linger in for a while. I may double back to one before I move through to the next stage. Again, it's not linear. She also coined the 7 stages of change. Now, listen how much these map against the 5 stages of grief. We've got shock and denial. We've got frustration. We've got depression coming into play again. And then we start to turn the corner and we start to lean into experimentation, decision-making, and integration. What I love about this, Michael, is that our methodology, if we call it that, which is the foundation, the starting point for everything that we do, is understand, own, and activate. We want to build deep understanding of the change. We want people to feel a sense of ownership of the change, the what's in it for me. And then we want to prepare them to activate. So if we look at those 7 stages of change that she identified back in the late 60s, that's how long ago she identified these. The understanding comes into play when we think about that shock, denial, frustration, depression. It requires understanding to break those down. I think when we start to feel some sense of control over change, that's when we feel a little bit more empowered. And that's I think part of our human condition too. If I can feel like I can control this somewhat, some change just comes at us and there's nothing we can do about it. But bit by bit, if we start to gain just a little bit more control over our emotions, over the way we're thinking about things, reframing them, that can be really powerful. That ownership comes into play, going back to her 7 stages, around the experimentation and decision making. When we start to get to that point, we're realizing the what's in it for me. We're realizing how we can participate in the change rather than being a victim of the change. And then that final piece that we call activation is really that integration. It's starting to, you're coming out of that downturn. You're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And now you have an opportunity to be part of the implementation of the change. We see a tipping point inside organizations where when it's a really difficult change, there will always be people who will throw their hand up and say, I want to be part of this. I want to help lead it. And they're sincere about it. The more people that you can bring into the change and help them build that level of understanding, the faster you can create that tipping point that not everybody's going to go with you on the change. That's reality. You're going to have attrition in your organization. That's not a bad thing if people are not aligned with where the change is going. But you do want to create that tipping point over time where people start to feel a stronger affinity to the change. They feel like it's something they can be part of as opposed to something that's thrust upon them.
Sorry to cough. I couldn't hit the mute button in time. I apologize to everybody for that. Anyway, moving on. I like so much of what you said there. And I'm so happy that you circled back to that experimentation, because as you were going through that, I was thinking, well, first, I have kind of a dark sense of humor. So the fact that the grief cycle is essentially the same as the change cycle, like there's some ironic humor in there. But as far as being human, it's important to recognize that, like, if we're asking people to change in any type of substantial way, there's going to be grief associated with that because they're letting go of something they know they're comfortable with, they might care about. And now they're getting pushed against their will to some degree. They didn't wake up in the morning wanting to do this. So now they're getting pushed away from where they want to be to where they have to be, which is new, which is unknown, which is risky, which is uncomfortable. It's just like if you lose someone or something that you care about. So that analogy fits perfectly when we stop to think about it. So super important illustrations, but really captivated by that thought of experimentation. And I have a strong inclination that this gets back to keeping people involved. But like when you start experimenting with somebody, that has to be the first stage where you're starting to accept it a little bit. You're starting to entertain the idea that this could be worth it. There could be value. This could be good. You start making it your own. Maybe I won't do it exactly how Tim told me how to do it, but maybe I'll do it really close to how Tim told me how to do it. So I'm essentially doing what you want me to do, but I'm just doing it my way. So I feel better about myself. But then the experimentation leads to that buy-in, because once you experiment with something enough, you feel confident enough in it to do it. And I think that's true for almost anything in life. So I love how you strung that all together. I think that is critical for people to understand and also implement.
I want to leap off that point, Michael. Let's say that idea of experimentation, giving people a chance to go and do. Before I started the involvement practice almost 18 years ago now, I had a 20-year corporate career, and part of that was at GE, and I was a global director of brand. We went through a worldwide rebranding of the company back then. This was in the early 2000s. To give you a sense of the complexity of this, there were 311,000 employees in the company at the time. We were based in more than 100 countries, and we had more than 100 businesses inside the company. Very, very complex. And you think of all of the different cultures layered into that based on where we were around the world. What I learned very quickly, and actually this was the genesis of the involvement practice, was we'd worked with just an amazing brand strategy agency out of London and New York and San Francisco. And they worked on the strategy with us, and they really pushed us to be visionaries in where the brand was going to go, that it would be as fresh 5 or 10 years from now as it was the day that we started rolling this out. You have to have a really good strategy behind a change like that. But it was anchored in our CEO, Jeff Immelt's vision to simplify GE. We wanted to simplify it for our employees. We wanted to simplify it for our share owners, our customers. Very complex organization, make it simple. So that was a big driving factor for the rebrand. What I learned really quickly by going on road shows is that we couldn't just show up and take people through the strategy and expect that they would take that and run with it. We're talking about lots of different cultures, subtleties in those cultures, things that out of the corporate office in Fairfield, Connecticut, we just simply couldn't know. And we started to get some feedback from different markets. Well, that won't work here in this market. Now you have to start to sift through. Is that just resistance to change? Or is it a valid perspective they've got and something we need to lean into? And we did that sifting process, and we found that 9 times out of 10, they were seeing things in their market that the strategy might not be as effective. So we learned, again, goes back to listening. We learned from our 250 person group that we put together, marketers around the world. And there were some things we were pretty definitive about, that we're not going to start changing I'll make this up, the font. The font is the font. It's a distinctive font worldwide. There's an importance to having that consistent so that when people see a GE ad somewhere, they recognize it as GE. But if a certain color meant something that we missed culturally in a market, that's something we need to address and we need to change. So we did a lot of listening and learning through that process. And I think the key was letting people experiment, letting them own it. And that was magic, really. When you start to see people do that, you know that they are now buying in to the change. We didn't have to convince them. We set up the business case for it, but then we let them start to work within it, and they came up with their own discoveries, and that built really strong partnerships around the world. And in fact, at the time, we had the CEO of one of the major advertising agencies in New York on the board of directors of GE. She was really surprised at how fast we moved the needle on this program. Now, I don't say that's just our function that did that. The entire company was moving in the direction of simplification. But the fact that I think we gave it away and let people own it, let them experiment, I think that was the key to rapid success.
I have no doubt, especially when it was so large and so complex and in so many different places. I feel like people are obviously resistant to change, but they're not just resistant to change. We often react to what we observe first based on our expectations and what we believe to be our relevant previous life experiences. Mm-hmm. So to get back to your telling and selling point, you tie that into here. Hey, we've got this really great idea. Here's what we're going to do. And here's why you should like it and do it. Well, sometime between here's our great idea and here's why you should like it and do it, people have their immediate reactions, which, as you know, are more often than not negative. I don't want to do it. That doesn't sound cool. That's too much work. I don't like it. It won't work here, blah, blah, blah. So then what happens is by the time we get to the selling part, if they're listening at all, they're not listening for a reason why they should like it and do it. They're listening for a reason why they shouldn't like it and do it based on the immediate interpretation that we didn't even realize they had because we were going through our rehearse. This is why we're awesome and you're going to love this speech. So to hand it over to them and to allow them to have very real recognized input, and like you said, not everything, but real recognized input into the process helps get them involved, to use your word, and short circuit that potential negative effect. And I feel like that ties into something else that you and I talked about recently, which is this whole concept of trust.
Yes.
And I know that trust is this nebulous thing, and depending on where people are and what their experience is, they have different opinions on it. But with the work you and your team do, I don't speak proper English, specifically, trust factors in significantly. Because first, the organization has to trust you and your team to bring you in, which for the record is the right decision if anyone is listening and considering this.
Thank you.
They got to trust that you and your team can relate to their team to drive the outcomes. Mm-hmm. But then probably more difficult is driving the trust within the teams that you're working with.
Right.
That there is a level of respect and understanding and inclusion, and that we are working towards something that in the end should be better for most of us. As you said, some people might self-select out.
Correct.
So I'm going to ask what I know is a super open question here, but I invite you to go in any direction that you like. Mm-hmm. How do you and your team work to create trust in environments that are often antitrust to begin with? Like, people don't want to trust you when you show up.
Yeah. So there are times, to be completely frank, there are times where we start talking to a client. It hasn't been a lot, but there have been times over the years where we've said to them, you're not ready to build an involvement culture here. The right dynamic has to be in place. Doesn't mean that they have to fully understand what an involvement culture is, that building of the understanding, ownership, and activation. But we just get the sense it's a very command and control environment, and this isn't going to work. So we don't want to waste their money. We want to be good advisors, good stewards of their budget. But in the situations where we saw low trust on teams, one way that we start to build that, and whether there's low trust or not, we start with a culture diagnostic. So I talked about understand, own, and activate as the foundation, our methodology, so to speak. But the culture diagnostic is always the starting point. And through a culture diagnostic, we really start to understand where are the areas for improvement, but equally, what's working well. It's not just about doom and gloom. What's broken? It's what's working well, and what do we need to continue to propel and celebrate and get people to recognize inside the organization. Culture diagnostic is all about listening. I had a friend of mine, he illustrated my mantra for the year. This is Gary Hirsch. He's one of the co-founders of On Your Feet out in Portland. They'd be a great talk for you, a great episode for you. But this is what Gary came back. Be in the moment. This is my mantra for the year. Be in the moment. And you know from your work, Michael, how important that is, that we're not getting sidetracked by what's going on in our own brains, but just really being present with what's happening in front of us. We're human beings, so it's going to happen. It's easy to start to jump to conclusions, but when we stay in the moment, we ask the right questions, we can start to break that down. As a facilitator, as somebody who's conducting a culture diagnostic. So what's a culture diagnostic? We do usually 45 minutes to an hour with a cross-section of the team that we're going to be working with. We spend somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour. We do it as a one-on-one. And the idea is to ask usually 5 questions of the individuals that we're speaking with. Now, we can tell pretty quickly whether we are building rapport, whether we're starting to build and generate some trust. Somebody who sits down in the chair and says, Tim, ask me anything you want. There's nothing I wouldn't share with you that I haven't shared with my manager. Great. That's probably somebody who's going to be an open book and we can have a pretty candid conversation with. But I've had others who sit down and I can tell by their body language, they're not there yet. And maybe after 60 minutes, they're still not going to be there yet. And I can get that sense that they're holding some things back. Okay, there's a reason for that. And we're not going to press. Our job is not to make anybody feel uncomfortable. But what we find is that people do get comfortable with us very quickly and they want to share. And this isn't about complaining about what's going on in their organization. They will equally tell us the things that are great about their organization, the reason they love working there, but they will lean into, here's the things that are really making it difficult right now. We don't lead the witness. We want to hear, you're smiling, we want to hear from them. And so, Michael, if you say to me, gosh, our teams have really become siloed, I'm not going to go into that next one-on-one and say, I hear your teams are working in a more siloed fashion. Instead, I'm going to listen to what you said, and I'm going to make a note of it, And then when I talk to Susan, then Susan says, we're kind of working all on our own right now. Oh, tell me more about that. Now we're starting to build the picture out without us bringing our own biases or what we think we're hearing into the conversation. Really, really important. We then take that, summarize it for the client lead. Very often there are other senior leaders who want to have a look at it as well. And every time, without exaggeration, there are things that the client lead will say, yep, that resonates with what I know about our team, both areas of improvement and things we're really good at. Wow, I didn't know that was going on inside the team. So the advantage of us being a third party coming in, I don't have skin in the game. This isn't my culture. I'm not wrapped up in the politics. I can have a really good open conversation with a cross-section of employees. And now we have the basis that we need to design an offsite or an experience for this team to help them move forward. What does that look like? We might be given 2 or 3 days. We might be given a blank agenda. We build it from the ground up. We might be told, here are some things that we want to make sure that we're tucking into the offsite. Great, we can work with that. What we want to do then is think about where we are today and what we want to get to, and then ask why a few times to understand what's the real end result we're looking for. Is it to help this team come together? Yes, let's check the box on that. But why? Why do we need to help this team come together? Well, they're working in silos. Why is that happening? Let's keep digging down until we really understand the reason why we should be there working with that team. And then we design a series of what we call micro experiences. So that's the difference between our change activation approach and a change management approach, that we are designing these involvement experiences where the team members, the individuals, can explore for themselves and begin to build that understanding, ownership, and ultimately be prepared to activate. It's incredibly powerful. I have a quote on our website of a client who said, I was surprised at how fast my team could move in just 2 days working with the involvement practice. I take a lot of pride in that and the team we've got, because we can build these experiences to start to bring some authenticity into the workplace, bring some vulnerability into the workplace. I can never guarantee, none of our team members can ever guarantee that a room's going to be safe, and we will never say that. You won't hear us say we've created a safe space for you. We will create a space that is a challenge by choice environment. So here's what we're going to be doing next. You can decide how much you want to lean into this. You can decide how much you want to sit back and observe. But what we find is when we give people a chance to go through a micro experience a couple of times, their guard starts to drop. They start to hear what other team members are saying, and they really lean into it. And they become more authentic with their team members. What's the end result of that? We start to build trust. We start to help people understand what triggers members of their team. So, Michael, there may be something that I say or do that triggers you, and you just shut down. You're not going to collaborate. If I understand that, now I can either avoid it or we can have a deeper conversation about it. So you can see all the things that begin to unlock. Again, culture is how work gets done. So if we can unlock these pieces to help the team work more effectively together, we're starting to move the culture forward. When we think about trust inside the culture, there's a nice knock-on effect that when we can help team members start to feel that sense of trust with each other, the environment feels safer. They're going to take greater risk. I would say calculated risk. We're not endorsing crazy risk. And they're going to share big ideas. Big ideas get shared. The team grabs onto those. They start to implement those. That leads to company growth. So there's a really nice progression. Unless you have a question, I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Paul Zak, who I know you're a huge fan of. Is this a good time to bring that up?
That's a great way to get me to not ask a question. Very well done. It's like back in the day when I would teach multi-day seminars. If I knew I really had to go hit the men's room, I'd be like, all right, we're going to have a quick break. Any questions? And as long as you say we're going to have a break, no one's going to ask a question
That's what's
because
in their
everybody
head.
wants the break. So that was perfect. Very well done. I have no further questions. I will not lead the witness. You may continue. And yes, for the record, I'm a big fan of Paul Zak's work.
For good reason. Paul Zak is one of the top neuroscientists in the world. He's been doing he's been studying trust. He's been studying the release of oxytocin into our systems and what that does. For those of you who are watching, I'm holding up his book, Trust Factor,
which I also will recommend real quick.
It's a great book, isn't it? And the wonderful thing about Paul, you think neuroscience, nerdy, he is an incredible human being. He tells stories like very few can. And his books are easy reads as a result of it, because he is very authentic and very vulnerable when he's telling stories about his work. So I met Paul a couple of years ago now, and it just clicked that what he's able to do is allows me to now scientifically prove the impact of what we do. So the first piece, one of his earlier books was Immersion. And through his neuroscience immersion approach, he can measure how immersed we are in any given situation. In fact, right now, I have his app activated on my smartwatch. His app is called Six, S-I-X, and I can look over and I can see that my brain is loving this right now. My conversation with you, Michael, it is firing up my brain. It's high value. I can see this in real time. So not only can we measure what our brain is doing, and I'm not going to get into all the science of this. Paul is obviously the expert on this. He's an extended part of our team. What my heart rate is doing is it's indicating through my it's being picked up by my watch that oxytocin is being released into my body. Now, we know that oxytocin helps people to feel safe, valued, and motivated to contribute. And when we are building a high trust culture, we're actually boosting productivity by 50%. So there's a significant reason to spend time building trust inside your organization. A lot of leaders push the soft skills aside, right? This isn't important. We need people who know how to read a spreadsheet and know how to run a P&L, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, that is all absolutely true, but we need to lean into the human side of the people that we have working inside our organization. So we know that when there's a high trust culture that productivity improves, we know collaboration improves, we know employee involvement improves, employee engagement improves. This is really powerful stuff. And now we can measure it. So when we are in the middle of an immersive experience with a team, if they are wearing a device and we've got them tapped into the app, we can see in real time whether we're building trust in a room. That's mind-blowing, right? It isn't the survey after the fact. Then we know that most people are conditioned to be polite on a survey. This, as Paul says, the brain doesn't lie. We're getting real data on what people are feeling in the moment, and we can adjust what we're doing to deepen that trust.
The technology piece is just astounding to me. It's awesome. That's something I'd love to learn more about later on, but that's amazing to me. And I do appreciate, by the way, that the conversation is entertaining to you. So thank you. It'd be pretty funny if you looked at your watch and like, Mike, I'm at like a 1, dude. We're gonna have to cut this off. Like, this is just a waste of my time. We're done here. But I think it was through Paul's work, if I recall correctly, because you talk about like when we experience trust, our brains secrete oxytocin. A lot of times trying to work with leadership groups and teach collaboration and all of these things. Well, we know that, I know because I learned it from Paul. I read his book. I've never met him. So you win. But we know that trust secretes oxytocin. Oxytocin is the love drug. We feel better. We're more involved and we're more engaged. But we also know that stress produces cortisol.
Yes.
And cortisol is an oxytocin inhibitor. So literally, if we stress people out enough, which is a tactic that too many leaders do accidentally or often intentionally. They feel like, well, if I get someone really stressed out, I'll get them motivated. No, it actually doesn't work like that almost ever. But if we get their stress levels high enough, they are physiologically incapable of trusting because we just shut off the oxytocin. They can't get there. And now we get frustrated with them, which only further deepens the disconnect. And now everybody's being judged and embarrassed, and nobody feels like there's any semblance of control, to get back to your point, and this whole thing falls apart. So by using this involvement approach, now you have the scientific proof of what you already knew. You're creating the opportunity for people to begin to build that sense of control. Control equates to power and safety. Now I'm not being judged. I'm not being embarrassed. I can take risks. And taking risks in this situation really means I might sound stupid for a minute, but I'm okay with that. And I don't think any innovation at any significant level has ever happened if people weren't willing to look stupid. So,
and
how
take
do we
a risk.
accomplish that?
Yeah, and take a risk.
That's what we're talking about.
There's an arc that takes place, and I think a lot of people miss it when there's two thoughts there. One on leaders and leadership, and then the experience arc. Most people think about getting a team together and just that piece of it. What are the day, 2, 3 days, week, whatever it is? What's that going to look like? They go ahead and they book the venue. That's the very first thing they do. They don't give any thought to, again, what's the end result? And then let's back into what kind of a venue we want to book that helps to foster the right environment. We've rented commercial photo studios up in New York City that are just a plain white canvas for certain teams. We've taken them into children's museums. We try to get them out of their environment to create a true experience for them, let them disconnect from the workplace. And when we can't, we transform the environment through sight, sound, and scent often to create a more relaxing, calming environment for them. What a lot of people miss is the pre and post of an experience. There is as much buildup in the pre-experience stage of how you're inviting people to an experience, helping them understand a little bit about what's going to go on without making them nervous. What that experience is like when they arrive at the venue, all these little details that really should be well orchestrated and will likely be unnoticed by the team. And that's a good thing. If they don't notice that there are things happening, but they feel a certain way, that's actually a really good thing. And equally important, that emphasis on the design of the experience is the post-experience. We learn by digesting experiences that we've had. It's not enough to just walk away and say, well, that felt great. There's a halo effect for what, a day or two? But what we really want to do is have people in a more facilitated setting start to break down, what was it about our time together that was important? How are we going to change the way we work together? What's the impact of us developing deeper trust with each other? And a really important question is, what happens when our new hire joins us 3 weeks from now who didn't have the shared experience with us? Now, if you've built a strong enough culture on the team, that new person is going to come in and they're going to subconsciously pick up those norms. We do it, right? When we start a new job, we just pick these things up and we figure out how to work inside the culture, the good, the bad, the ugly. So it can become an amplifier across the team, even when we start hiring new people who didn't have that shared experience with us.
In that it lives, getting something to live beyond the events. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to create an immersive 2 days experience, 2 day experience, 3 day experience. I'm not trying to say that it is, but for somebody at your level and your experience, it's not difficult. What is difficult or becomes more difficult is to get somebody to wake up 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years later and go to work still implementing and still carrying on, maybe not the full emotion, of course, but the thoughts and the takeaways that they had from that event. And I love your thought. Someone else had shared the term force multiplier with me, which comes from the military, and I never served. But I like how you say amplifier. They're gonna take that message and give it to more people. And maybe they don't give it the exact same way, but they're carrying it on. So whether it's the new employees or a group that didn't get to attend or a future meeting or however it is, that message keeps rolling and the impact continues to live on more than you said, that initial halo effect.
And even more important than the message is the behavior. How does what we experience together become part of how we behave? And that can be seen and felt by others around us, even if they weren't part of that shared experience.
Yeah, I tried. I feel like most mornings on the drive to school, I just give my son and I a headache. Right, really, I feel like that's what I do. He's in elementary school, but recently he had a little kind of incident with a couple of his little buddies, and it's normal elementary school stuff, right? Nothing bad, but trying to talk to him about like the day you say differentiate yourself to a 7-year-old and he says, what does that mean? Is a good day to just try to pop the airbag. Like, how do I get myself into this? How do I get out? But having that conversation with him, like, it's not just what you say, but it's how do you model the behavior and how do you model it over time? And by the way, here's how your little friends are likely going to react. And when they do, here's how to be prepared for it. Here's how to carry it out. And then to continue to have those conversations. But as somebody I talked to this morning said to me, oftentimes what works with kids works with adults. And how do you model that behavior? And you talked about before, it's being human as the leader as we're going through this too. Goes beyond saying, well, this is hard for me too. Like maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but people aren't going to believe that necessarily.
Right.
So where are the illustrations to back that up? Where are the words with the actual emotional connotation that goes with them? How do you deliver the message? So it's authentic. You're not acting. Sorry for all your Hollywood friends, but it comes across as delivered in a way that it will resonate with the audience. All those things become so important.
Right. And related to that, I want to come back to my admission of stealing something from McDonald's, because you did nail me on that one, Michael.
Guilty.
This idea of freedom within a framework, and this applies to the bigger picture here as well. So McDonald's years ago coined this phrase, and if you Google it, you're going to see people using it in a variety of different ways. My understanding, it came from them. Maybe it came from a consultant that was working with them. I don't know. But this is 20 years ago. When McDonald's talked about freedom within a framework, I was studying it because I was interested in their brand. How do you create brand consistency? I was at GE, as I mentioned, leading global brand. Their idea of freedom within a framework was that the things on the outside, picture a frame with a painting in the middle. The things on the outside of that frame are the non-negotiables. Those are the things that make up the McDonald's brand, that make it recognizable and consistent no matter where in the world you are. What the power of this notion of freedom within a framework is not the frame outside so much. Those become the guardrails, but the inside is where you can empower people. So the way McDonald's did it is they gave flexibility in how they marketed, depending on where you are in the world, flexibility on how you interacted and got involved with your community, flexibility in compensation models. So there was a level of empowerment within that frame. I loved that, and I brought it into the involvement practice. And the way we look at it is, if you create the right, maybe guardrails is negative, but if you create the right outer frame, which would be made up of your mission or your purpose, your vision, your values, your brand, and your business strategy. If people are really clear on those elements of your culture, you can then empower them to make great decisions without looking over their shoulder. Now, you'll hear people argue, well, we need to make sure people have memorized. If we stop them in the hall, can they tell us word by word what our purpose statement is? Can they tell us what our 5 values are and explain them the way we wrote them? Time and time again, I have said that is not important. What's really important is that they understand the essence of how all those elements work together to form that outer frame. So that if you stop an employee in the hallway and say, can you tell us how your values impact how you do your job every day? And if they can talk about that, they understand it, They own it and they can activate it. That's incredibly powerful. But to get people to, we used to carry when I was at GE, we used to carry a values card. I think it was in our wallets. Some people put their values on the back of their company IDs. I don't know that I ever pulled it out. I had it there. But that I think was the big lesson for me, that when we understand why we're showing up and doing what we're doing at the company every day, and we understand those elements of the outer frame, that changes how we do our jobs. It changes how we collaborate with others. We're seeing the bigger picture of where the company is going and how we can contribute to that.
Again, I can only agree. And I have to chuckle too. I love it when I hear like CEOs or senior executives or board members, well, if I walk down the hall and I ask somebody, if you walk down the hall and ask a random employee to tell you anything, you're going to get gibberish because you never talk to normal, regular employees. You never engage with them. You never have a conversation with them. And if you stop them without any warning and ask them to recite anything to you, it's going to be a deer in headlights. And whatever comes out of their mouth for the first 30 seconds at best is not going to make sense. So let's put our egos in our back pocket and start thinking about this rationally. And that's where your point is so critical. It doesn't matter if they can say it word for word. It matters if they're, for all intents and purposes, living it and behaving it every day for the right reasons to generate the right outcomes. That's what matters. Don't say it back to me word for word. Just show me that you're actually doing it. That's what really matters. But yeah, I get a kick out of being in some of these rooms. And well, if I go and ask him, you're going to go ask somebody you've never said a word to in your entire life. And every time they walk by your door, you don't even make contact, but they see your eye contact, but they see your name everywhere. You're going to go ask that person a question and expect to have a conversation. Let me know how it goes.
So we actually had a situation, and as you're saying that, this is bringing me back to an experience we built for a major bank in Canada a number of years ago. Senior leadership team comes together every year. There's 300 people in the room. These are from all across the country. And we struck on something that had never been done before. We said, what if we brought frontline employees in and you guys had a conversation with them? You had a chance to listen to them. They'd never done this before. These are the people who are dealing with their customers every single day. And what we heard is that the frontline was just overloaded with change. With all the good intentions that come with leadership teams launching a new change initiative, they would get an initiative out there and they wouldn't see things happening fast enough. So what would they do? Launch the next initiative. I call this the pancaking effect. And the next one comes, the next one comes. They never gave them enough time to let the change take hold and see results from it. By bringing those group, and I can't remember, we had 15 or 20 frontline employees come in. And now, this wasn't deer in the headlights. We brought those folks in. We spent a lot of time briefing them. We spent a lot of time with those 300 leaders saying, listen, they are all taking a big risk being here. Put yourself in their shoes. Please be kind and please do a lot of listening. Ask some great questions. It was a home run. The leaders learned what was going on in the front line, that the changes were coming out so rapidly that they were doing their best to get them implemented, but they couldn't because the next one was coming. They learned so much in that piece of the leadership offsite, I think more than anything else that we did with them. And what I was told is they've made that part of their senior leadership event from that day forward. They always bring in the front line to get the perspective on what's going on. To your point, it creates a very intimidating dynamic when a leader walks down the hall and says, tell me about such and such. We created an environment where they could have that conversation in a really productive way.
That's a fantastic idea. And congratulations to you for getting them, intentionally or otherwise, to implement that permanently moving forward. I always have to chuckle when I'm working with a senior leader on a problem. And it's, well, when I ask him or I ask her, I don't get. So on average, how many times a week do you say hello to this person? Well, so you mean you're going to take somebody who you outrank and you never say hello to, and you're just going to ambush them likely, or otherwise schedule a meeting, which just feels like a scheduled ambush, by the way, to ask them these vulnerable questions and be upset when they don't open up to you. Like, let's take a step back and think about this for a few minutes.
And think about the complexities of politics that we talked about earlier on.
Yes.
There's so much politics inside an organization. It guides how we show up, the ideas we share, the risks we take. I've often said that, again, we don't consider ourselves consultants and we're not an agency. We are a change activation company. But how amazing it would be for corporate people to spend a bit of time in a consultant role or in an agency role and vice versa. The worlds are night and day.
Mm-hmm.
And by having an opportunity to walk in a set of shoes that is very different from your own, there's a lot more understanding built. And then we start to leverage, if we didn't have, if my team didn't, incidentally, we've got 20 people on the team. They're from all over the world, loads of experience. I love the fact that we get all these global perspectives when we're collaborating, when we're coming up with ideas to solve challenges within client organizations.
That's a great point about the organization life and the agency life being night and day. I think all too often, you and I have both been in both, but it's easy to forget that what's like in the other, or it's easy to assume that because we're successful in one, we know what the other is like. So building teams with global perspective and these outside ideas do help us tie it together when we are looking to solve these unique challenges that any organization can face. Whether they're a truly unique challenge or whether there's just unique aspects for how the challenge is manifesting within a certain company.
Right. I had that experience when I was on the corporate side. I had a major agency who was recommending something. I brought it to the attention of their CEO to say, this is not going to work inside our organization. And his response was, Tim, just give it time. We could have given it loads of time and it still wouldn't have worked. It doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It just wasn't the right fit for our culture. And I think that's the danger of not having that experience when you've got people who've just been raised on the agency side or just been raised on the corporate side. Agency people generally don't understand all the politics involved. Again, I don't want to demean anybody. No. I've got some amazing friends that work in incredible agencies, but often they just don't see the complexity of what it's like to be inside an organization, and how much somebody's going to stick their neck out to get an idea through. And on the opposite side, often corporations don't understand the complexities of being in an agency and delivering. Now, we are service providers to our clients, of course, so we move mountains to make that happen. But my point being that I think it's really important to understand each other's perspective and would be valuable when it comes to implementing change to understand those dynamics and the difference between those two dynamics.
And even within that, I think there's a really important lesson to go back to. And I feel this pressure because somebody hires me from the outside, I give them some ideas and I start seeing their face going, and inside I'm like, damn it, because they hired me to make this easy and have all the answers. But the reality is they didn't necessarily hire you or I to have all the answers. They hired you or I to help get them to the place where the correct answers can be found. Mm-hmm. And that's the important thing to remember. So for anybody listening, if you ever go to somebody and present them with an idea and they say, well, that's not going to work here, I don't think that's going to fly, or whatever, you get pushback. Hopefully the first two words out of your mouth are thank you. When somebody says that's not going to work here, you know what? Thank you. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Yeah. Obviously, there's intricacies here that I just wouldn't have the opportunity to understand or the experience with. I'd be grateful for you to take some time and walk me through why it wouldn't work, or even better, what adaptation might be a great fit.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's so important to truly be a partner. And you heard me say, we call them client partners. It isn't just a client, it's a client partner. We are in this together. We are collaborating together. The changes they're facing are very difficult. And we want to learn their business as best we can. We want to understand what they are experiencing And then the magic of what we do, which is really not magical at all, it's creating an environment where people can deeply understand those changes and be brought along, understanding that our clients, that client team member is going through the exact same thing. As we talked earlier, it's just that they're a little ahead of the curve. They've maybe had a few months to think about it, and the rest of the population is being surprised maybe by a change.
Just finding out about it now.
Yeah.
So much good stuff. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock, and I'm worried about two things. Number one, overstaying my welcome with you, which leads to number two, I don't want your watch to alert you that this isn't fun anymore.
We are cranking. My brain is loving this, Michael. Loving it.
I can't thank you enough for your time. This has been an awesome conversation, and I've got a sense that we're going to get a round two in here pretty soon because there's so much meat on the bone that we haven't had the opportunity to get into yet. But we are right up about an hour, and I want to be respectful for everything you have going on. So let's go out on this. For everybody that's listening to this conversation and they want to learn more about you, they want to learn more from you, they're interested in not only what the involvement practice does, but what you know and what you could provide, like, I don't know, maybe a keynote speech that we managed not to force you to quote word for word today. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, great, Michael. Thank you. So the best place to go is theinvolvementpractice.com, the name of our business, theinvolvementpractice.com. They're going to find all that there. They're going to find some of the clients that we've worked with, the approach that we take. We've got an insights page where we're regularly sharing current events like the back to office implementation of the Amazon policy. So we try to stay current on what's going on out there and provide a perspective. And as you said, the black box of change, that's a keynote that I deliver. People can learn more about that. And it's a great place to just reach out and have a chat.
Which I highly recommend. And I'll make sure to share all of the links in the show notes so people can find it directly. They don't have to go hunting around. And if people haven't figured it out already, you certainly have my endorsement. So I can't thank you enough for spending the time today on relatively short notice. We just talked the other day and decided we were going to do this. So thank you very much for the quick turnaround, for having the conversation. It's always great to see you. It's always great to learn from you. And I can't wait till we have an opportunity to do it again soon.
Thanks, Michael. Look forward to coffee.
Yes, let's make that happen intentionally this time. Be safe. We'll talk to you soon, Tim. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Tim, thank you so much for an awesome conversation. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. I learn something from you every time we have the chance to talk. Hopefully everybody who joined us today also took plenty of notes. And now when you start thinking about instituting change or improving your culture, whether it's at your business, in your social network, with your family, you have new approaches to take every single time. We highly recommend you reach out and connect with Tim and his group as well whenever you have the chance. You made so many great points today, Tim. Even just something as simple as thinking about culture is how work gets done in our organization. That's a great way to look at it. Pragmatic, so that's my language, and makes total sense. It's actionable. I also love how you talked about separating the purpose from the mission. A lot of times it's very easy, especially in change work, to get bogged down in the mission for so long that we forget what we're doing, why we're doing, how it's actionable, how people relate to it. So separating the purpose from the mission was very important. And in any time as a leader, but especially when there's change involved, the importance of modeling the behavior we want to see from others is so very important. Tim, thank you again. I really appreciate you being here. Of course, thank you to everyone that listened to the episode today. We appreciate you being back week after week. Thank you so much. Hopefully you're learning as much as I am. Please, before you go, take a moment to like the show, share the show, subscribe to the show, leave your comments and feedback. We would love to hear what you think of these conversations and maybe who else you'd like to hear and what else you'd like to learn about. Please let us know. And of course, please go check out our sponsors, humantel.com. Please head over there to check out all the information you need to know and learn to start your educational journey to learn how to identify when people's emotions are shifting based on changes in their body language and nonverbal communication while you're there. Facial expressions as well, of course, I should have said. While you're there, enter the code INCLUSIVE25 for 25% off their best-in-class online training. While you're online, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. If you're a professional interviewer, that's where you need to go to learn more about the International Association of Interviewers, all of the training, networking, educational, and contribution opportunities there, as well as the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. What does it take to qualify? How do you prepare for, pass, and maintain that designation? All of those questions are answered at certifiedinterviewer.com. And of course, please, while you're online, please head over to inquisive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to customize for their senior leaders, their sales teams, their HR teams, and more, to teach them how to obtain the everyday confessions hiding in all of their conversations. As always, we really appreciate you being here. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.